Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video we're finally back talking about The Circle. It just feels like it's been a while since I've talked about it, but here we are going to be reviewing the Celebrity Circle UK, which was a 1 week special before the Circle UK Series 3 started, which I will also be doing a video on down the road. But here, with the Celebrity Circle, I came into this really not being that excited for it. I always plan on covering it because, it's The Circle, and I have talked about every season of the show worldwide up until this point, and the cast here has actually been out for a while. I believe back in December they announced it, and I had never really heard of any of the celebrities here. Obviously these are UK celebrities, but even then, having watched seasons of Celebrity Big Brother UK, I thought I would have known a lot more people here. But when watching the season, despite not knowing any of these people, I did find this cast to be pretty strong. I was surprised at the level of gameplay on the season, where it did seem like a lot of these people actually wanted to play the game. And this cast really did make for some pretty fun characters, despite us not getting that much time with them. Now, like my other reviews, I'll be running through season episode by episode. So here, let's just jump right into it with the premiere, which they quickly introduce us to the celebrities, and I do feel like they kind of rush through the profile creation here on this season, which is fine. I don't necessarily miss it, but this was a standard season. I think the pace would obviously be a lot slower here. I did find it interesting, though, that most of the cast ends up playing as catfish here. While people like Denise, Duncan, and Saffron do play as themselves, we do have Ricky and Melvin, these DJs, playing as will.i.am, who I do question their choice there. I do think will.i.am's probably too big of a name for the Circle UK, though at the same time, I do believe will.i.am has been doing The Voice UK, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that he would be on another Celebrity UK show, but I do feel like they took a bit of a leap there. And I do think that made them pretty fishy right off the bat. Nadia and Kay end up playing as Gemma Collins, who I had actually heard of. Again, I knew nothing about her, but I at least heard the name before, so that was something. Lady Leshurr plays another rapper named Big Narstie, and I really do question this decision, as well as, I don't get why she played as a catfish. It really felt pointless to me. It really did lead to a lot of messiness on her end. Pete and Sam end up playing as Rachel Riley, who whenever I hear her name, I keep on thinking of the BBUS Rachel Riley. So that was something. We had Baga Chipz, who was from RuPaul's Drag Race UK, and she ends up playing as Kim Woodburn, who actually is someone that I had heard of before. Again, I know she was on Celebrity Big Brother, even though I didn't actually watch the season she was on. But again, I at least knew of her. But we do eventually see the players seeing each other's profiles for the first time, and we get a lot of incorrect reads here on who is and who isn't a catfish, particularly from Lady Leshurr, who, and she becomes pretty notable for this throughout the season, that her reads are really, really bad. Baga Chipz, or Kim, pretends to not know how to use the circle after having just made a post, and Baga was really playing this old person act too hard, with her pretending to not know how to use emojis and her really playing up how an old person would talk. I did find it funny how when Saffron ends up talking about how this is the first time she's away from her family, we do get this kind of race to comfort Saffron, so that was funny. But then we do get the first ratings based just off of these first impressions. But again, I was very happy to see the celebrities here playing pretty strategically, targeting Denise due to her being well connected, and due to some of the catfish here being worried that she would be the one to figure them out, which we obviously will see plays a major factor on these ratings. After this, we do get some pretty awkward flirting between Gemma and Big Narstie, who are both catfish. We do get a fun game where they had to guess which celebrity a headline belonged to, and it was funny to see Lady Leshurr mess up her question, not knowing that Big Narstie was scared of fish and talking about how he actually likes fish now, and again, that was ridiculous. But I did love how the DJs here did pretend to support him through this, as Ozzy gave them an excuse in case they end up getting their question wrong. We also get this really awkward tweet about a scissor-shaped coffin, which belongs to Kim, and again, this further proves that she's a catfish after acting like she didn't know how to use social media when she clearly does because she had a tweet. But then we get the ratings results where you definitely get the sense of some really strategic voting where, again, Denise is at the bottom, a lot of people get tied for 5th place, but Saffron and Big Narstie end up being the influencers here, and we get a cliffhanger of the influencers having to publicly nominate one player. And that moves us to episode 2, which really slowed the pace down a bit, where again, that first episode was very fast paced. The second episode here really just focuses on this first elimination, which was already in progress during the last episode. So because of that, it does kind of feel like not much actually happens in this episode, but it was nice to get to know these characters a lot more. As I said, like we do pick up from last episode where we get the nominations. Big Narstie ends up nominating Denise, while Saffron ends up picking Duncan. And we do get some conversations between the noms and the influencers where they're pretty much just trying to suck up to the influencers to try to stay. And again, it was really weird seeing like Denise trying to flirt with Big Narstie. Again, this woman in her 40s in a long-term relationship flirting with a catfish. Again, it's weird. But we do also see Duncan really trying to bond with the influencers by trying to make them realize that he is really him. And I will say I did really like the hustle from him, where despite it not ending up working, I do think he did play pretty well despite that. We do see the formation of the first alliance on the season, with Pete and Sam leading the charge and making an alliance with Gemma and Kim. Again, pretty much an alliance of a whole bunch of catfish. And while this alliance doesn't really matter much, I do think this kind of sets the tone for the season, where it does feel like at this point alliances are kind of the norm on The Circle, because like the last time we saw in season 2 of The Circle UK, an alliance pretty much dominated the end portions of that season, and because of that, people were pretty upset at the people that did make the alliance. Again, a very like Survivor Borneo-esque way of looking at the game. But I do feel like here in the Celebrity Circle, I mean, despite this being a celebrity version, again, these players played hard and understood the game itself. But yeah, I find it funny that like we see these alliances become normalized first on a celebrity version of the show. After this though, we do get this boring task of them having to collectively walk 26.2 miles, and they have to wear these really ridiculous outfits while doing it. Again, it was really just pointless, especially because they could just lie about how much they walked. But it was funny to see Pete and Sam almost mess up here by saying our instead of my in their message here, so that was great. But then we get to the blocking, where Lady Lashur seems to really want to send Denise home, but for some reason she just decides to let it go. Though I will say I did like Saffron here, her playing strategically and wanting to save Denise in order to keep a target in the game. But through this, Duncan does end up getting blocked, and on his way out he does get to meet someone, deciding to meet up with Gemma. And though not much actually comes out of this, I did find it funny how Nadia and Kay didn't even know that Denise and Gemma knew each other in real life, despite the fact that Denise narrates the show that Gemma became popular from. But before we move on, let's talk about the first boot here in Duncan, who I really liked. I was pretty disappointed to see him go first. I mean, though, to be fair, I did like this entire cast, and really seeing anyone here would have been disappointing, but I did feel like he seemed like a really affable guy, and one that genuinely wanted to be there. I did like how he tried to bond with the people in power and wanted to play the game itself. Now, it does seem like he didn't really reach out to Saffron before she became an influencer, and I do think that's largely what led to his nomination and his eventual downfall. But to me, I did like him as a character on the show, and I did like how he played the game, despite the fact that he did come up short here. But now for episode 3, which mostly focused around the arrival of Charlotte Crosby, who I had actually heard of in the past. I knew that she had won Celebrity Big Brother, even though, again, another season that I actually did not watch for myself. But she does come in here playing as Peter Andre, and I found Charlotte, again, to be really fun here, with her seeming to be a bit in over her head at points, or at least acting like it. I mean, the thing about Charlotte is that I feel like you can definitely tell that she was a fan of the show and had done an extensive amount of research, but I just think naturally Charlotte is the type of person that is probably not skilled to play a game like this, and I think through that lacks some confidence in her own ability. But she did have some pretty fun moments here. I mean, a lot of that having to do with, again, her not being the brightest person in the world. But when Peter does get introduced to the other players, he does get a pretty warm welcome. But I will say that, again, like, I don't get why we're adding a player in late. I guess they just really have this fetish for like adding in players afterwards, because like it really feels like this was completely unnecessary. It's like, why didn't we just start the season with 9 players? Especially considering the Circle Series 3 starts with 9 players. It's like, it's so bizarre to me that when we have only a 9-person cast, like why not just start the season with everybody? Put everyone on a equal playing field. But again, I guess it's just not what they want to do. But after this, we do get this weird segment of the cast dancing to one of Peter Andre's songs, which is bizarre. And then after this, Charlotte has to play a game where she has to describe celebs based on their pictures and get the others to guess which ones they are. And again, this was mostly just rushed through. You can tell that production themselves even thought that this wasn't the greatest segment in the world. But we do get some drama here from Gemma spelling out the name of Amy Childs wrong. And this was bizarre to me. This was such a strange thing to happen. Where again, the Circle is a voice automated system. Now, I'm pretty confident it's actually just someone in the background from production typing in what they're saying, but still, like, if you just say Amy Childs, they're probably going to assume that you said it right and going to type it right. But for Nadia to be so confident to say, no, it's not Childs, it's Childs, making them change the spelling, and for her to actively be wrong on it is so bizarre, but also just so funny to me. And really just goes to show how bad this Gemma duo here was at the game. And we do see this continue as well, where the Gemma duo decides to call Denise Dens, which again, like, considering Denise and Gemma were friends in real life, the fact that they're calling her Dens when the real Gemma never has, again, not great. But this was all really fun to me though. And this does eventually lead to an alliance between Denise and Rachel, which I really liked, as those were probably my 2 favorite players at this point in the game. After this, we do see Big Narsty making a man cave group, and Charlotte, who knows the real Big Narsty from a show called Celebrity Coach Trip, which I could not tell you a single guess on what that show is about. But we do have her asking Big Narsty about this, and I think Layla Shur gets really lucky here, with her giving a very specific response, which again typically does not work when you're playing as a catfish, as it usually leads to you being called out for something, but she actually ends up getting it right somehow. But we also get a similar situation later on with Denise and Charlotte herself, where Denise knows the real Peter Andre in real life, and Charlotte awkwardly responds to Denise's questions and ends up gaining her trust through that. But from a game standpoint, this episode didn't really do that much. The only thing of real importance here is that not too long after Charlotte entered the game, she got to select 3 people to kick out of her welcoming party, and she ends up selecting Kim, Gemma, and Big Narsty, who aren't able to chat for the rest of the night. And at the end of the episode here, we were revealed that these 3 players are actually the nominations for the next blocking, now being members of the Triangle. You get it? Again, the circle, the triangle. Ha ha. But again, this was just dumb to me, despite me not actually hating the twist itself. But then we get to episode 4, which focuses around the members of the Triangle. But before we get to the blocking, we do find out there's actually going to be a competition, essentially like a veto competition here, where the winner returns to the circle, essentially being safe. And again, this was a dumb comp. I mean, this is something that like Big Brother US and Canada have technically done in the past, but it doesn't really make for the most riveting TV, especially in the way that the circle does it here, where the players have to count to 3, 30, and 300 seconds, and the closest to the correct times ends up winning. And Big Narsty ends up winning the comp and finds out that she also gets to select who replaces her in the triangle, which is a pretty big power there. Again, that's essentially the Diamond Power veto from Big Brother, which is a potentially really powerful twist in Big Brother. And here on the circle, it's kind of a similar thing, though I do think Big Narsty really mishandles this, where she does end up selecting Saffron to be this like sole individual that is targeting someone that was number 1 in the rankings in the previous episode. Again, someone that's very clearly popular within the house. I think is really just dooming you in terms of your perception from the other players. Now, again, I get it as a move of targeting a really strong player. Again, a player that is very well liked, but to be honest, that wasn't even her rationale. Her rationale here was that she thought Saffron was a catfish, which she obviously ends up being completely wrong on, with Saffron being one of the few people in the game that is playing as herself. Now, we do end up getting more chats throughout this episode though not many of them end up coming off as super memorable to me, though we did end up getting a lot of game-related conversations with Rachel, or Pete and Sam, talking to Kim, to which Bag of Chips talks about wanting to stay loyal to Rachel to the end. We do get a similar thing with Saffron. We see Big Narsty starting a chat with Denise and Rachel, and I will say at this point, I do think this pretty clearly shows Pete and Sam as being in the best spot in the game, with no one really suspecting that they're a catfish and having numerous one-on-one bonds throughout the game. But during this conversation, I did like how Denise set up her targeting Gemma, while Big Narsty obviously tries to target Saffron. And I did find it fun that Pete and Sam are so convinced that Big Narsty targeting Saffron is this big elaborate plan to cover up that he's actually a catfish. Which, I mean, they're right that Big Narsty is a catfish, but I can assure you that this is not some massive plot here from Lady LeSure. We do later see the DJs that do play as will.i.am make an alliance with Big Narsty to keep the guys together, which is pretty ironic here considering, again, both of them are catfish, and also the fact that their alliance doesn't even last a full episode. But then we get to the vote, which for some reason production decided to make it a unanimous vote, which I will say that it is funny that so many of the celebrities here didn't know the word unanimous, which I think is also very worrying about the British education system, which I feel like I've pointed out numerous times now on Celebrity UK season reviews or retrospectives, which again, very worrying there. But for the actual vote, we do see a split on the first vote here, with Big Narsty and will.i.am going for Saffron, while Denise and Rachel go for Gemma, and Peter is in the middle. Now we also find out that when a decision isn't made, instead of having some sort of tiebreaker, we instead just go to a revote, and then a revote, and a revote, until a decision is made. And this was fun as a TV segment, to see Big Narsty refuse to flip, despite everyone else caving in to get rid of Gemma. But as a game mechanic, there should be a tiebreaker. This is ridiculous that the Circle production essentially just gives up at the end. Again, there should be like a Rocks-esque rule like on Survivor, where if the tie isn't broken, then those who can't make the decision are now in danger. But instead, they end up just making it a majority vote anyway. Again, just production kind of caves, and Gemma does get voted out here. And the episode does end on a cliffhanger with them getting to meet someone, which really amounts to nothing. But let's talk about Gemma, or Nadia, and Kay, who were fun enough. I mean, they certainly weren't my favorite characters on the season, and I do think they ran their course through the season, but they did have some fun moments through them seemingly not knowing a single thing about Gemma Collins, despite them catfishing as her. And this was just such a terrible choice of someone to catfish for, not necessarily in concept, but their execution of it is so bad. Also, I do think they get kind of unlucky that the cast was relatively familiar with Gemma, Denise in particular, and I do think that kind of ruins their positioning as well. But I do think ideally the strategy here is probably to catfish as a lesser known celebrity. Again, while Saffron wasn't a catfish, I do feel like catfishing as a Saffron-esque celebrity would have been the ideal strategy here. Now for episode 5, which did start off with the Gemma duo meeting up with Big Narsty, and again, this was pretty uneventful, though it was pretty humorous how they both seem to have completely inaccurate reads. But after this, we do get a good amount of focus on this new Big Narsty will.i.am feud that stems from both of them trying to blame each other for Saffron being targeted at the previous vote. And we do get this really strange segment of them having a rap battle where the other players have to decide the winner, and this felt like filler to me. But after this, we do get to the ratings where it really felt like Rachel is the clear frontrunner at this point in the game, with her being first for will.i.am, Kim, Denise, and Saffron, and get over half the house. Literally 2/3 of the people that could have put her at number 1. A lot of the players also end up putting will.i.am in last, with Denise, Peter Andre, and Big Narsty doing so, while Big Narsty is last for Rachel and will.i.am, which pretty much made those bottom 2 placements pretty obvious. I did find it interesting how Peter Andre and Big Narsty seem to have this faux bromance going on here, with them rating each other first, despite them not really having that much of a storyline together on the season. But we get to the results, and the influencers end up being Rachel and Denise, which I was pretty surprised that Denise was able to recover so much, going from the bottom placement all the way to second place here. But we do end up seeing them debate over who to block, and there was some intrigue here where Denise was trying to save Peter while Rachel was trying to save Kim. But we do learn that this will end up being a double blocking, and the episode ends on the cliffhanger of them having to block the players face to face, and that leads up to the finale. We do see the blockings, and I was pretty surprised at who they picked. I mean, while the show did show us them debating over Kim and Peter, I never actually thought that they were going to be blocked here, as I just thought that they were trying to cover for the obvious boots here in Big Narstie and will.i.am. Obviously, them not being well connected within the game, but no, the show is actually being truthful here, and we do end up losing Bag of Chips and Charlotte. The meetups themselves were just fine. I mean, I didn't really feel like there was much actually going on there, though I did find it kind of funny that we found out that Sam from the Rachel duo actually had been on Celebrity Coach trip with Charlotte and Big Narstie, and this obviously never came up on the show up until now. But I think really just shows how close this UK celebrity group seems to be. But before moving on, let's talk about the two boots here, starting off with Kim, or Bag of Chips, who was fun when she was shown. I mean, she had a snarky personality, though I did feel like she was just rarely shown outside of your random reaction shots or her being called out for being a catfish at points, but she definitely wasn't a focus on this season, though she did have a couple fun character moments here and there. And now for Peter Andre, or Charlotte, who I also thought was pretty fun. Again, I do really like this entire cast. But just like most of this cast, I do feel like she was underutilized, especially because she didn't join the season until a third of the way through it. And she's clearly not the brightest bulb in the world, but I did like how she clearly did her research before coming in. I do think she does one of the better jobs in playing a catfish on the season, where there weren't really any massive moments of her messing up her facade, unlike many of the other catfishes within the game. But after this, we do see the players find out about who was blocked, and even Big Narstie and will.i.am thought that each other were going to be blocked, as again, it just seemed like the obvious move. And I will say that I do think this was probably the incorrect move for Rachel and Denise, these two big targets coming into the finale, as I do think keeping in Big Narstie in particular, as someone that is so poorly regarded within the house, to have that person remain in there as a person to prop up in the final ratings, I do think that was a strategic misstep there. After this, we do get the obvious announcement that the final 5 here are the finalists, and we have a few more chats through the episode, though none of them really have much consequence to them. We do get a game called the Golden Circles, essentially a game where the players vote to give the others superlatives, and I thought this was mostly uneventful outside of Pete and Sam making the error in my eyes and not selecting Denise as the most genuine, which does irritate her, though to be honest I don't think it really plays that much of a factor on the season. We do get to the final ratings, where it does seem like people are playing strategically. Again, this season is surprisingly strategic despite this just being a group of celebrities. After the vote, we do get the final dinner, which I found pretty underwhelming. I mean, there were really no big moments here, unlike previous meetups. I mean, there was no Kate and Dan moment. I did think there was a chance we would get an awkward Denise and Rachel meetup, but there's really no backlash from that. Overall, I just found this dinner pretty boring, honestly, but then we get to the reunion, which was obviously filmed immediately afterwards, and while I've never loved these reunion segments, this was definitely an improvement over how it was handled in Series 2, where I do feel like the conversations here felt a lot more natural instead of your typical stilted interview, though I did still find this section pretty slow, and I was just waiting to see the results. Where we do see that will.i.am comes in last, followed by a somewhat big shocker in a joint third placement between Denise and Rachel, who were obviously the frontrunners coming into this rating, but through that, obviously you knew that they were going to be voted down if people were playing optimally. Again, I was sad to see not one of these two becoming the winners, as I do feel like they're two of my favorite characters over the course of the season, but it does lead to a more chaotic outcome for the season, where Lady LeSure is declared the winner. Again, a really insane way to end this season, where obviously she does end up winning due to strategic voting in the final ratings here, where people voted down Denise and Rachel being big threats, and through that rated Big Narstie higher, as she was perceived to be the least popular. And I'll say, I actually did not see this coming. I mean, coming into the finale, I was fully expecting a Saffron win, due to her being kind of in the middle popularity-wise, as typically there is this kind of conflict between the two ideologies where some people are voting completely strategically while others aren't, and through that, usually the person in the middle, popularity-wise, ends up winning. However, here, with pretty much everyone seeming to play pretty strategically, it does end up with the least popular person actually ending up winning here. And obviously through that, we got Lady LeSure win, who wins despite playing pretty terribly throughout the season. But because of that, I do think it makes it an even more fun way to end the season. Especially because, like, The Circle is a show that I don't really take too seriously, especially from a game standpoint. I do feel like as a game, it's still trying to figure itself out. And because I can really just look at the Celebrity Circle as a fun, shorter season that really took me off guard on how good it was. But before we end the review here, let's talk about the finalists, starting off with will.i.am, or Ricky and Melvin, who I thought were really fun. I mean, again, like, just like a lot of these other cast members, I don't feel like they were given enough time to make a lasting impact here. I mean, like, to be honest, I know nothing about these two as individuals. They do have fun moments. I mean, they have some fun reads, them trying to act as will.i.am, and again, that was fun, but it's like every single time they were shown, it seemed very surface level, and really I can come out of this knowing almost nothing about them as actual people. Now for Denise, who I found to be a really fun character on this season, I did find it funny how connected she seemed to be with most of the cast, where, like, even in that final dinner, like, almost everyone coming in seemed to have actually met Denise in real life already. But I do think these connections made her a lot more interesting, especially when she would test the other players. I mean, she also had pretty unique personality with a strange sense of humor, and to see one of the older women in the cast play the flirt card was, again, just really weird to see, but also makes her a really memorable character. Now for Rachel, or Pete and Sam, who I think are clearly the people who came into the game the most prepared for the strategic elements of the game. And they do end up dominating the social elements of this game, having so many one-on-one personal bonds, and that allowed them to really just skate through the game, though it did also make them a really big target at the end, where they were the obvious frontrunners, and through that, it was obvious that they were going to be voted down due to others obviously wanting to win and wanting to greater their chances of winning. So I will say that despite them dominating the game socially, I do think that was their one big misstep within the game. As characters, though, I did find them to be really fun here, with Pete being the most strategically minded person in the game that seemed to be a grump at points. Sam seemed like the polar opposite to him, with him being overly happy and being more prone to making some dumb mistakes that it seems like Pete would have the counter most of the time. But really, I thought they had a great dynamic and were really fun on the show. Now for Saffron, who I found really likable during the season. I mean, she just seems like a genuinely nice person. And most of the time, the nice person on these shows ends up being really naive within the game. But I do feel like Saffron had more game sense within her, especially with her move to keep Denise around as a target over Duncan, and with her voting strategically during those final ratings. But I mean, outside of that, I didn't feel like her character really popped out here. She really just seems like a nice person, but through that also comes off as one of the most normal people on this cast. And finally, we have the winner in Big Narsty, or Lady LeSure, who was the star of the show for most of it. I mean, I think you can clearly tell she was getting way more screen time than most of the other people on the cast. Again, it was really her, Denise, and the Rachel duo that were getting a majority share of the screen time. And because of that, I do think she's definitely one of the more memorable figures from this season. But a lot of that came from the fact that she was so bad at the game. So bad that it made for great TV. And actually also, if you think about it, so bad that it ends up giving her the win. And she messes up numerous times for clearly not knowing Big Narsty well enough, and her having some really terrible reads on the players within the game. I mean, she was pretty much wrong every single time she made a claim of who was a catfish, especially of her being so convinced that Denise and Saffron were fake when they were two of the only real people in the house. So I mean, again, Lady LeSure just really was a bad player. It really feels like she had no clue what she was actually doing. But again, it worked out for her, largely due to the fact that she was the obvious person to prop up in the final ratings to harm the bigger targets within the game. And through that, with everyone doing that, that essentially turns the game around and making her the most likely winner at the end. Which again, I've talked about in the past. I do think that shows a flaw within the system of the Circle. I do think they made an improvement in the Circle France, where they kind of added this jury element to the vote, which I do think actually might be the solution moving forward. I'm not 100% on that, but I do think here, going back to the original format of a final ratings, I do think we clearly see that the least popular person ends up actually winning the season, which is clearly the opposite of what the producers are trying to make happen. But there we go. I mean, those are my thoughts on the Celebrity Circle UK. Again, I really enjoyed this season, and while part of that may be due to my low expectations coming into it, it did surpass those expectations by a lot. I do feel like this season, it was a proof of concept on how to do the circle with people that already know each other. And again, I've talked about this before with my Circle All-Star video, where like I very much question whether it would even be possible to do a season like that. And I do think this celebrity version here kind of proved that you can do it. I do think you need a larger group of people, especially a group of people that aren't tightly connected as what obviously we would have from the current seasons of the Circle UK, with only 2 seasons, now 3 being done. I mean, like, I just feel like we need more people, but I do think later down the road, I can actually see an all-star season happening when there are more people to actually catfish as. And another great thing about this season is the fact that it made me so hyped for Series 3 that obviously started airing immediately afterwards. And again, like, right now, it's a pretty busy time for me, both in terms of real life, but also within the context of this channel, where obviously Big Brother Canada is on, The Challenge is on. Like, there are other things that I am focusing on. And again, that was a lot of the reason why I wasn't excited for the Circle, in the sense that it was adding another thing I had to handle. And again, with the Circle being pretty much daily, that's a lot to be keeping up with. But I do think just the fact that this season was so fun made me more excited than not, despite this, again, not being an optimal time for me to be watching and assessing a show that airs daily. But as I said, Series 3, I will be doing a review of that when the season is done. You can stay tuned for that. I'll also be covering those other shows I just talked about. So The Challenge, Double Agents, we'll be doing a review of that. Big Brother Canada, you can expect a mid-season power ranking at some point relatively soon. And obviously a review once the season is done. So stay tuned for those. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.